Sometimes we feel like we put a lot of effort into our work, our family, and spiritual life, and we just seem to get by and do okay. But do we really strive for holy greatness? People see us for the great value we provide because we can get things done. But life seems a little too easy. Is there something wrong? Am I missing something? The answer to this is yes. Most of the time we do a good job at work or family or life in general because we have a myopic drive, a drive that we are comfortable with and world likes it, but does not get us to holy greatness and success. Hello everyone. Today's topic is about achieving holy success through balanced drive by doing things outside of our comfort zone and breaking our myopic drive to become more well-rounded and perfect. It is not what we are good at that makes us great, but how we can improve in our weaknesses that makes us great.
Welcome to another episode of Practical Catholic with David Cease. Practical Catholic is a spiritual coaching show to help you find peace, love, and joy in family and work life. We are here each and every week to help you grow spiritually, to become successful in this life, and to be a saint for the life after.
My story begins in the Marines. I was a booth second lieutenant and was assigned what they call a CAX, which stands for a Combined Arms Exercise. This is a 4-week war that we had to do out in the deserts of California. And this was the first time I did it as a officer, so I was in charge and leading about 20 to 25 Marines in this exercise. Now, combined arm exercise is when we combine all of the arms that the Marines have, such as the air component, artillery, machine guns, and this is all live fire. So it's dangerous, but it's really exciting because it simulates war as best as you can do it in peacetime. So my job was I was the aviation officer, and so I had to lead these 20 Marines to supply all the parts for all the air assets. And we had F-18s, we had C-130s, Cobras, Harriers, all these various aircraft. And I had to make sure that they were supplied with the parts needed. So this is my first time. So I wrote the after-action report on this exercise. And one of the key things that it emphasized was the logistical support that I needed. So I needed forklifts, Humvees, I needed tents, I needed, camouflage. I needed all these things. So I went to my S4 officer. He's the logistics officer, and he was a major. And I didn't know this at the time, but he was a short timer, and so he really didn't care about his job. So I remember looking at the major and saying to him, "Sir, I need all these supplies. Are you sure you're going to get everything for me?" Looks me in the dead eye, looks at me and he says, "Lieutenant, I'll hook you up." I'm like, okay, great. So lo and behold, I arrive in the middle of the desert of California at 29 Palms, and I'm there at the 20 Marines, and with all the parts, they were in these things called mobile facilities. These are just vans that look like makeshift housing kind of a thing. They needed to be moved with forklifts. So what happened was that there was no forklifts, there's no tents, there was absolutely nothing. So we're here with all the parts, with all the Marines, and with no accommodations. So I can say this, I didn't know what to do. I was confused, bewildered, tired. And so that night, one of the Marines goes to me, "Sir, what are we going to do?" And I remember looking at that Marine saying, "We're just going to go to bed, or let's go to sleep." So we had to sleep in a makeshift area out in the middle of the desert. So the next day occurs, and fortunately I had befriended a warrant officer prior to going on this CAX. Now, a warrant officer is, even though I outrank a warrant officer because they're higher than an enlisted, but they're lower than a commissioned officer, which I am, even though I'm a second lieutenant, you don't mess around with a warrant officer. And the reason why is because they are prior enlisted that achieve this warrant officer level, and so they have great experience and a lot of wisdom. So you typically don't mess around with them because of those reasons. So I went to the warrant officer, and he was he had done at least, I think, 10 or 15 of these at Caxas, so he was well experienced in it. And no joke, when I arrive in his area, he's the only one that's close to me because he's an ordnance officer, and our compound is close to his. So I go to him, and no joke, but he's in this makeshift swimming pool, literally floating on a tube with, a little, looks like a daiquiri or whatever it is, sitting there. And I am, pretty amazed at that, just generally speaking. And so I say, hey, Gunner, I need a little help. And he looks at me and he says, what do you need, Lieutenant? And I said, well, the S4 officer, I told him to give me all these logistics, and I don't have it. And he looks me in the eye and he says, Lieutenant, you trusted the major? And I was kind of flustered. And I said, well, I'm a lieutenant. I kind of use that as an excuse. And he said, all right. Then he said, look, I'll lend you my Humvee. You go back to headquarters, all right? Because the headquarters was at least a couple of miles away. And you make things happen. And I go, what do you mean by make things happen? And he goes, you know what I mean. He goes, when you go over there, just make things happen. And I was like, okay. And I'm scratching my head going, how do I make things happen? So we go, he lends me his Humvee. We go to the headquarters, and I go to the logistics officer that's there, okay, at in this fake military operation. And I look at the lieutenant that's there. He's the S4 officer. And he goes, and I'm looking at him going, I know this guy from somewhere. He looks at me the same way. It's like, I know him. And so all of a sudden it dawns on us that we look at each other and we say, TBS, the basic school. He happened to be on the same day, him and I had duty. So we had to spend all night pretty much on guard. And when we were spending that night together, we had a blast because he happened to be Chinese and I happened to be Korean. And at that time in the Marine Corps, there weren't a lot of Asians in the Marine Corps. Maybe there are more now. And so we used to just laugh and joke about how there were like hardly any Asians in the Marine Corps. In fact, I think at TBS, I think I was the only Asian in a company of 250 lieutenants. So we would just joke around and we kind of bonded. But then after the exercise, after the duty was over, he actually left because he was a class ahead of me, and I had to go through TBS. So we never saw each other again, except for this point. And because of that one moment in time, we had bonded. We were almost like rekindling our friendship. And so I gave him a list of all these supplies, which I thought was going to be insurmountable. And he looks at me and he says, "Oh, I got it. Don't worry about it. I'll make sure you get everything that's on this list." So he, tells me all these things. So then he looks at me and he says, "Well, David, I can give you these supplies, but some of these things you actually need to build." And he goes, "You need to talk to the engineers over there, and they'll help you build these things. They'll help you build the CP-10 because I wanted a CP-10 for an enlisted living quarters, for officers' living quarters. I wanted an O Club area 10 for the O Club and one for an E Club." Because we wind up having food sent to us, and I would also do beer runs. So in the evening, they could be, they could have beer. I allowed them to have a couple of beers per night. And so he goes, "Well, if you want, the engineers can build all of this stuff for you." So I said, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah." And so he says, "Go over there and talk to Lieutenant, I forget his name, but Lieutenant Johnny or whatever." And he goes, because I know him from the academy. And so I go over to Lieutenant Johnny and I say, "Hey, Lieutenant Johnny, I'm here because I know your friend over there from the academy." And he comes and he says, "Yeah, I'll hook you up. Don't worry about it. You'll be good." And so before I know it, my whole area is being built. I have all the logistical supplies. I've got engineers who are helping me out building my whole tent city. Everything is working well. But one thing I'm missing is a forklift to move these heavy objects. So lo and behold, I see this forklift coming, right? And so, the forklift's driving by. I go in the middle of the street. I wave them down. and I look at the, this Lance Corporal. Lance Corporal's very low on the enlisted chain, and I'm a lieutenant. So I look at the Lance Corporal, and I say, Lance Corporal, where are you going with this forklift? And he says to me, "Sir, I'm going to the ordnance area, so I gotta, move certain, explosives around." And I looked at him dead in the eye, and I said, "No, your job right now is to move these mobile facilities." And he looks at me and he says, "No, sir," because I need to go to, this is my order, is to go to ordnance. And I look at him and I said, "Who's the officer in charge? I am the officer. You listen to me, all right?" And so you can see him, he's getting scared because, of course, he's just a Lance Corporal and I'm an officer. I'm a second lieutenant, all right? And there's a big gap in rank structure. So he concedes, and lo and behold, I use him to do whatever. After 3 hours later, I take him over. He leaves and goes to the ordnance officer. That evening, the warrant officer comes to me and he says, "I'm so behind." And I look at him and I'm like, "Why are you so behind, warrant officer?" He goes, "Someone stole my forklift and used it for their own purposes for 3 or 4 hours when I needed it." And I kind of closed my eyes and I was like, I don't know who would have done that. And he goes, "Yeah, I wonder who did that." He goes, "If I find that person, I'm going to kill him." And I was like, "Oh, yeah." And, that's what happened. So, we can have great drive, and sometimes we can use it, but we can also abuse it as well. And in that case, I did. But I guess for all good purposes, I did wind up, getting the job done. And that's exactly what happened. I learned to drive. I learned to drive in this special way, and a gift that I had. But this gift was very myopic. Okay, this drive is very myopic in the way that I drive. And we're going to talk about that, the way that I drive. I love the military because the adrenaline that it pulls on these crises, and I learned that to do that. And another reason why I love the Marine Corps is because, you are the judge, jury, and executioner, especially as an officer in the middle of nowhere when you're leading these troops. And so you create these little tent cities, I would call it, and you are like the mayor. But you're not only the mayor, but you're also the jury. You're a judge. You're everything. And it's the adrenaline rush that goes through it is tremendous. I miss those days in the Marine Corps, but it's the same thing with running a business. It's the same way. I'm creating my own thing. But the one thing that I did learn is that there is this thing called myopic drive, that the way that we drive isn't always perfect. So the last episode, we discussed the lack of drive, and today we're going to go and talk about what happens when too much drive occurs, but it's not too much drive. It's really that it's myopic drive. And this is where people don't understand. Myopic means that we're focused in the way that we drive rather than being well-balanced. Drive that is almost, too myopic is not well-balanced and is not orderly. Okay? Sometimes people praise them and call them the type A personality, and they're the people who are very aggressive and they get things done and they're in charge kind of a thing. But really, I want to say that there's actually two major groups of myopic drive because, a lot of people think that the type A personality who take charge and do that is the only one who drives. And that's not really it. There's two types of myopic drive that I've seen, not just in the military, but also running a business. And then also in how marriages are and families are run. You see this in personalities amongst women and men, husband and wives, mothers and fathers. And, some of these myopic drive, these two groups, they will clash. And when they clash, they typically cause a lot of issues in marriage life, in family life, as well as, in the workforce. Okay. So I first saw it at the workforce, and then I saw it unfold even in my own marriage, as well as seeing it in marriages and families of others. So what are the two major groups? Well, I euphemistically call them rabbits and turtles. Okay, we all know about the turtle and the hare story, right? About the rabbit who's faster, who gets to the finish line, the rabbit or the turtles. Now, when I mention this, I want to always emphasize that we don't use this to judge other people. I don't like creating these things so that people judge other people. It's really to use it to realize where you're at, to understand where am I so I can change, okay, and be more effective in becoming holy, becoming a success, all right? We don't start pigeonholing other people, okay, because that's not what we do. It's really for ourselves. So what's the first group? The first group I call the rabbit myopic drive. These are people who are typically what we call the crisis managers, the people who are, the ones who basically are the type A personality, as we would call it. And I kind of fit in this category. Like rabbits, they are a burst of energy and are driven to accomplish a task. They typically are over-emotional, have a need to be very overtly aggressive. So one thing that is in this area that is important to understand is that they typically are emotional. In fact, they're emotional because that's what gives them that drive, is the emotion that gets in there. And they're overly aggressive. We call them aggressive. There's passive aggressive, and then I call them aggressive. They're overtly, the fuel that drives their passion. So if you look at our last episode 5, I talked about our passion is what is the engine that gets things done for us, right? So, and there are 3 fuels for the engine of our passion. That's anger, fear, and love. So what are those fuels and how are they fueled? Well, the first is anger. Anger really fuels a lot of these types of people. They're the people who's like, enough is enough. They tolerate certain things, and then all of a sudden they explode, and then they have a need to get things done. It's usually like a boiling point, and they're like, I have to get this thing done. So they're really good at crises because they can get things done, and because they're fueled by this anger that gets it done. Another fuel that they're fueled by is fear. A lot of times they're fueled by disappointment, or they have high empathy, so they can see the disappointment in people, and that's what fuels them. And then lastly is the fuel that they do is, we know that is love, right? Love doesn't mean here that it's love, like the gushy feeling. It's the, what they like. And the 2 things that they really like here is adrenaline and empathy. Okay, adrenaline and empathy. They are fueled by this adrenaline and empathy. What is empathy? Empathy is this feeling of other people. They are pleasers. They are fueled by where people say, "Oh, you did such a great job," or "We like you," because they have high empathy. A lot of times they are treated by a guilt treatment, and sometimes they don't know how to say no because they are fueled by that empathy and adrenaline. They typically like the adrenaline high, as we mentioned. There are your crisis managers and can problem solve and get things done under extreme crises. That's what they can do. They're sprinters. They can only sprint, but then they get burnt out very quickly. Sprinters can only run half a mile. After that, they can't do anything, but they give that burst of energy. In fact, they can only work under incredible crisis and cannot work under normal and systematic methodologies. These people can't work under processes. They can't work under systems. It's very, very hard for them to do that. They get bored if they are not challenged. And when I say challenge here is challenge underneath a crisis. They lack regimentality and can only focus and do well and thrive in crisis mode. And the reason why crisis mode is important is because crises only occur for several days or whatever. But here's the key thing. They are mission focused. All right. That's why they do such a great job, is because, and they can handle crisis, is because at the end of the day, they know how to, they know what the mission is, and they can accomplish the mission. And they're very mission focused. Okay. They work very well in fluid environments and ambiguity. They love that. They thrive on that. All right. They're the type of people, give an example, is that if you are in a traffic jam, okay, and there's no traffic, they're the ones that are trying to figure out, well, what's the bypass? How can I go around it? What can I do to, get there quicker? Regardless of whether they need to or not, they're trying to problem solve and try to get away from this traffic, okay? And you'll find that the other type won't do that, all right? So that's what rapids, or what I call the rapids myopic drive, does, all right? They're great sprinters, all right? And they're mission focused, all right? The second group I call the turtle myopic drive, all right? The turtles, they're slow and sure and steady to drive to accomplish a task. Like a turtle, they will climb over objects that are in the way with no regard to the object. So they are sure and steady, and that's what they do. So what are some typical characteristics of this type of drive? First of all, they have low empathy and don't really care about what others think or behave. Others have to conform to them, okay? They're very self-centered. Now, don't confuse this with selfishness. They're just self-centered. They don't really care about others. They really want them to conform to them. They are typically passive-aggressive, okay? The reason why they're passive-aggressive is they really don't like emotions. They don't like anger as one of the things. Now, they do get angry, don't get me wrong, but they don't get angry, or they don't like that feeling, all right? The fuel that drives their passion is love. What is it? One of the main things that do is they love a system. They love regimentality. They love control. And they love themselves. They're self-centered. Now, I'm not saying that they're selfish or they're evil. It's just the world revolves around them, okay? As opposed to being high empathy and like the rabbit that looks at other people and tries to serve them the most. But their really love is focused on a system, regimentality, and control. We have a disorder called OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, where they're so overly clean and everything. This falls under it. They love that system. They love being in control and doing that. So the love of the system and control so much, regardless of whether systems or control works out. Okay, this is one of the fundamental issue, is that they look at it and say, "Oh my goodness, I love this system so much," and they would love the system regardless of whether it actually accomplishes a mission or not. Okay, the other is fear. Okay, that's the other fuel. Fear of the unknown, fluidity, ambiguity. For them, fear is is avoidance. The fear is more of avoidance, okay, than anything else. So they're not really good problem solvers. They like a system, and they're very comfortable with it. Just like a turtle. A turtle's comfortable of just keep doing the same thing over and over again, okay? Anger, okay, that fuel. This is the least of their favorite because they don't like anger. They don't really use anger to fuel themselves. Because they dislike it, all right? So they're not really fueled by anger as much as they are fueled by the love of a system, control, and regimentality, okay? The biggest, as I said, is control, controlling others, controlling situations. This is why systems and processes are important to them. The reason why systems and processes are important to them is it's very logical, all right? It's very regimented. And they look at systems and processes that says, if I do this, then I can control this. So they are, a lot of this category, it's hard for them to be leaders. They're only managers. And there is a difference between the two. Managers managed by numbers, okay? If I do this, then this will happen. If I do that, this will happen. Leaders are people who can lead people through their passions, through empathy, and through systems, don't get me wrong. So there are some aspects of management that a leader needs to have, but managers are just managers, and they do things by the numbers. So they love systems and processes because it's very regimented, it's very easy. You don't rely a lot on empathy. You just push buttons here and there, and voila, you can control other people. And because there's a lot of control involved, they can do that. They get lost if they are in a fluid environment or ambiguous environments. They can't really work on that, and they have low problem-solving skills. They are process-focused, system-focused, as opposed to mission-focused. As I said, the process is more important, not the mission, okay? And so a lot of times I've seen people fail in this category because they set up this process or the system and they think that's going to work, or they have trouble creating the process or the system because they don't know how to problem solve. They know that the system is great, but they don't know how to implement that system because they don't know how to problem solve. So they are your long distance runners. They really are your long distance runners. So those are the two myopic drives that you see. Ones that are focused on control through systems and processes, and ones who are your crisis managers who will go and handle those crises. And what's important about this is that either one is not better than the other. Okay. That's one thing we have to understand. It's not to say that the rabbits are better than the turtles and the turtles are better than the rabbits. No. And the world will want you to think that, right? They really will. But in reality, both of them have strengths. And that's what makes them really good. That's what really, really makes them good, is both of them have strengths. And you will always see them do that, okay? Both are myopic in their drive. Both will run over people. Okay, this is one thing that's wrong about myopic drive, is that they will always run over people. Okay, both have issues in life because life is both fluid and is systematic. Okay, the reason why people won't achieve greatness or holy success because if they're one way or the other is mainly because life is both systematic and fluid at the same time. People who live in a systematic myopic drive, have two problems. One is that, life isn't always 100% a system, okay? It's very fluid. There is ambiguity. And also the second reason is that systems, to deploy a system, to create a system, you have to problem solve. You have to do that. And if you can't problem solve, then you can't create the system. Conversely, if you're the rabbit that can only live in crisis and you can problem solve, the problem is that a system will allow you to, have your business scale, meaning make it larger and bigger and better, but will also allow you to sustain longer. Okay, and that's really what it is, because at the end of the day, life is a marathon. A lot of people that I know, even in the spiritual life, will give up very quickly. Let's say, for example, doing the liturgy of the hours. I have to do the liturgy of the hours every day, at least minimally twice a day. And because of that, it's a marathon. I can't just, say, all right, I'm not going to do it anymore because I made a profession to say I'm going to do this. So it is a marathon. Spirituality is a marathon. But there is a component of problem solving, of fluidity that occurs in life that we have to handle. So that's why we have to make sure that we're actually balanced. Okay, all right. We have a balanced aspect of it. Okay, so I like to use the prodigal of the son as the story of that, to emphasize these turtles and rabbit mentality. So we know the story of the prodigal son. It's a story of And here's what we're missing in the prodigal son. A lot of people emphasize the prodigal son, hence the story. But there's three main characters in this story. There's what I'll call the prodigal son, okay? You got then the father, then you've got the brother, okay? So the three main characters are the son, the father, and the brother. Now, the son is what I would call the rabbit type. He basically says to the father, Dad, give me your inheritance. And I can imagine what he's thinking, the son is thinking. He's thinking, if I get this inheritance, I'm going to be a millionaire. I'm going to go out and be a success. He gets all this emotional high, all right? He, does all these things, and he thinks that he's going to be this great success. But what happens? He doesn't become a great success because the lusts of the world take over, and he squanders all his money. But what's neat about the prodigal son is that the son comes to his senses. You see, the rabbits are very emotional, and it's only when the emotionalism is balanced by reason that he becomes a well-balanced person. And it says it right in the Bible. He came to his senses, okay? And says, wow, my father's servants are fed better than what I'm getting right now, which is the husks of swine. So it's this balance. He had to use the reason, okay, and not just his emotionalism. And he goes back and is forgiven by the father. But then what happens? His brother comes along, and his brother, he hears the music, and he says, what's going on? And his servant says, well, your brother who was lost, is now found and came back, and now your father's having this great big party. So now here, listen to the dialogue of the father and the brother. The father says, your brother's been lost. Your, is now found. He was dead, now alive. So let's celebrate. And the brother's response is, look at, he goes, I have done everything for you, okay? And not only that, but your brother who squandered all your money, you're giving him a party. So what can we see? We can see that that this brother is self-centered. He's centered around himself. Look what I have done. I've done everything. You see, the second is that he thinks it's a system. In other words, if I had just done X, Y, and Z, then my dad's going to love me and he's going to have a party for me, right? There's very low empathy for the father, okay, where he doesn't have the empathy, where his father's joyous because his son has come back. He doesn't have empathy for his brother, the prodigal son, because he just, he lived a life of squander. So, the father then says to this brother, what I'll call the prodigal brother, everything that I have is yours. Come and celebrate. And it kind of ends, right? So we don't even know if the brother celebrates or not, all right? But the point I'm getting here is you can see the turtle and the rabbits here, the self-centeredness, this idea that of a system where the brother is saying, I did this, I did everything you told me, and why is it that you're not giving me this, okay? And you can see the low empathy, okay? So if we were to flip this around and say, just like the prodigal son who was able to come to his senses, because what he lacks is the reason, okay, this idea of it. And then he became almost like what I would call a perfect person, right? Complete person. The prodigal brother, he needed to get more empathy. He needed to get more, heart involved to understand that he should have celebrated, knowing that, his father was happy to see his son who was lost, okay? And he should be happy for his brother who was dead, who was never around. So this is where we're getting this myopic drive, okay? This is what happens to us, all right? So going back to it is that there has to be a balance in our myopic drive, not just, for the sake of business, because I will tell you that in my business, I had to become more like a turtle, okay? So it's not just to succeed in the work life, but also it creates harmony in our family and our spiritual life. We do a really bad spiritual disservice if we're always in a myopic drive. So what causes us and prevents us from being balanced? Okay? Now, I will always go back to the three enemies of the soul, okay? The world, the devil, and ourself, all right? So what are the three enemies of the soul, all right? Generally speaking, the world, the first enemy, will praise, train, and pigeonhole us to be a myopic drive. They will. And I've been, in business and and also in the military for now 25 years. And I can tell you right now that the world praises you for this myopic drive. When I did, that story that I told about me being in the Marines, I was praised for it. I got great accolades for doing that. And the more, and not only that, but as I started getting more comfortable in the Marines, I started behaving that way, and I was a crisis manager, and people loved me, okay, for that, right? And so there was this air of comfortability. This is who I am. I'm a crisis manager. This is exactly what I am, and I was able to handle it, and it was great. They train us to do that. Okay, the military trains us to be crisis manager because, in essence, war is a crisis. That's really what it is. They're just little crises and big crises. That's what they are. The second is that they pigeonhole us. When I say pigeonhole us, is that they basically say, this is the type of personality you have. You're a type A personality. This is the type of job that you should do. A lot of times we get these personality personality type scores, right? We even did it to my kids and say, what kind of job do you think I should have? And we go to this website and they say, well, you're a personality this way, so you should take this type of job. And, they're good to give them a good start or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, that's actually doing a disservice because you're pigeonholing them. You're saying, because you're only this type, you should only have this type of job. And that's a big disservice, okay? There's this book called Good to Great that basically, really, really emphasizes this. Because the emphasis of this book called Good to Great is about finding the right person in the right bus on the right seat. Basically what it's saying is find the person who can do the job and, why try to train them or mold them into something else. The Marine Corps can't do that. The Marine Corps has to train everyone to be a certain type of way and to be a lot more well-rounded. So how do we do about training? Okay. The training, if you read a lot of the other books, they train you to be almost myopic drive. Even the Christian books, one of them was Dale Carnegie, How to Win Influence. What is a book called? How to Make Friends and Be Influential. They're really disingenuous, all right? No sincerity. And I'm not saying that these books are bad of it in themselves. They're not. And you can glean a lot of great wisdom from them. But what typically happens is we get so focused in implementing them that we are really disingenuous, okay, and not sincere. And at the end of the day, what it teaches is manipulation. That's basically what it's teaching, rather than being very genuine. And the way to be genuine is to be very well-rounded in that aspect of it. And that's a virtue that we need to focus on when we do that. So How do we get this myopic drive from the world? Well, because they praise it, they train it into you, and they pigeonhole you in it. This is what you are, and this is the only way that you can thrive. And we have to get out of that mold. We have to get out of it and say, no, okay, I'm better than that, okay? The second enemy of the soul is the devil. Okay, and the thing about the devil is that, again, it's the 1-2 punch. He uses the world, okay, as the fuel to kind of get us in to tempt us, right? So the first thing that he's going to focus on is he puffs up our pride. That's the major thing. You see, myopic drive, there's a level of success in it, and no doubt that there is. But that level of success is just a good success. It's not the great success, okay? It's not the holy success that God wants us to be. So he puffs up our pride because we are somewhat successful, all right? That's what we are. I mean, I was very successful in the Marine Corps in the way that I was driving. I had the go-getter attitude. I had made things, got things done. But it was only at the expense of others, and it was also at the expense of myself in growing to become better in other areas. So he puffs up your pride. He says to you, basically, you don't need to change. Why do you need to change? Okay? That's the first thing that pride does. Humility is opposite. Humility says, I need to change. There are strengths and weaknesses that I have, and I need to work on my weaknesses and tone down my strengths, okay? So, but pride says, no, I'm good at what I do, and I don't need to change. So he puffs up that pride. You're good. You're great at what you do. You're awesome. Look at all these people telling you how great you are, how awesome you are, how successful you are. In reality, you're really not, because you're just good. You're just at this level of good, okay? And not at the level of greatness and holiness, all right? So that's what he's going to do. That's the main thing he's going to do, is puff up our pride. And I saw it, without my own life, and then always fear, uncertainty, and doubt, all right? So a lot of the times we have myopic drive because we are puffed up by pride, which leads us to a comfort zone, okay? Why do you need to change? And that's what Satan's going to say. You don't need to change. Okay, first of all, that's so difficult over there. You're not even good at that. All right. So why do you need to do that? All right. Oh, that's really scary. This is something you've never done. All right. And that's how he does that 2-1 punch here, is that he basically, puffs you up with pride, and then he gives you a set of comfortability, and then tries to give you fear of not going into this outside of your comfort zone. All right? And he does that a lot. Remember, he does it through our thoughts and our ideas. And that's what the devil does. And then third is our self, the last enemy. Okay? It's the hardest because we got to live it 24/7. And what are the issues with the self? First of all, it's pride, okay? Pride. I am better and doing well. That's what it is, okay? But you'll plateau. That's what you'll do. But pride will set in and saying, I'm already good. I'm already, thinking that I'm already great. I don't need to change, all right? It's centered around your passions, all right? You're not logically thinking this out. Pleasure. You feel comfortable in the way you are. Why do I need to get outside of my comfort zone? I don't need to come outside of my comfort zone, okay? Because, I'm good at what I do. Complacency, all right? We have a saying in the Marines called complacency kills. And, fundamentally, what's wrong about myopic drive is that we become complacent. Okay, we think this is the only way we do it. The world tells us this is the only way to do it because this is what you are, and so we never seek perfection. We never seek the completing ourselves, becoming well-rounded, and then really striving for that. All right. So we become complacent. We don't want to go outside our comfort zone. We're just satisfied of what we are and who we are. And again, fear, okay? Fear and pleasure and that misleads us to perceive what the true good is. So this is the battles that we confront, all right? And we get in this level of complacency, all right? This is how I am. So when we can be more well-rounded, okay, we can become, we can, and go outside of our comfort zone, we can then achieve greatness. I'll share a simple example of this, and then this is my own life. I was a type, I am basically a rabbit. That's what I am. I'm a crisis manager. I'm really good at that. And I did a lot of that when I first started this business. When I first started this business, that's exactly what I was. People, really liked me for that. And I was a very good consultant. I remember I worked at the World Trade Center because they wanted the best to handle a crisis. And that crisis was the fact that they were having this system failing, all right? And it was very important that it stop failing. And I solved the problem. Not only did I solve the problem, I looked like a hero. The company loved me because the customer wasn't paying this, I believe it was around $15 million invoice until the system was cleaned up. And because I cleaned it up, they were able to, get that $15 million invoice. And so the consultants, so this company that was using us as a subcontractor loved me. And I was getting all puffed up in pride. I'm a great whatever. But you see, I would only have been a consultant for the past 20 years if I only thought that way. After 7 or 8 years later, I realized I had to think a different way. I had to think about how to scale this company because I didn't want to be just a mom and pop consultant. I wanted to treat this like a corporation. Okay. And so how do I scale this? How do I become more sustainable? And what I realized was this crisis mentality that I needed that I was good at, the Marine Corps, taught me and people were praising me about was actually my limitation. It wind up causing me to think myopically rather than going into a different area. So I had to get outside of my comfort zone and figure out how do I conform, how do I get this, what I would call, this other type of turtle drive, where I create systems and processes, all right? And lo and behold, that's what I started doing, creating systems and processes and living by them. And so I was then able to scale from, 3 to 4 employees all the way up to now 20 to 25 employees. And, if you take any business courses, there's only less than 1% of businesses in the United States that are greater than 20 employees. Think about that. I'm in the less than 1% category, okay, in my business. Now, that's because I had to get out of my comfort zone and become, and learn and acquire the other side, this what I would call the turtle myopic drive, right? So I became more balanced. Am I naturally a rabbit type of myopic drive? Sure, I am. But I had to go be more centered. And I still have to fight that. I still have to kind of go and do that. All right? So what are some bad things about myopic drives, whether you're one way or the other? The rabbits are always rash, angry, and emotional. Turtles are so focused on process and have so little regard to empathy, compassion, and even the mission, okay? So both are pretty careless to people. Both have issues in life because life is both fluid and systematic. In marriage and in family life, it can destroy the relationship, okay? I've seen relationship being destroyed because a rabbit and a turtle, they really can't mix together sometimes, okay? Turtles try to be controlling. Rabbits are emotional. and both of them really don't mix well, but if you're well balanced and if you understand this is how we work, then we can start having a relationship that will last. So I had to become more centered, less emotional, okay, and more systematic, all right? And my wife had to become more of a rabbit, meaning more fluid, okay? And she has. She's changed a lot, okay? So, and I've changed a lot. So it's the idea, but when we're rigid in our rabbit myopic drive and our turtle myopic drive, then we start clashing, okay? So we need to be centered so that we can meet each other halfway, okay? So that's, in a marriage, and I've seen it. I've seen when both of them, are both of them are great drivers. They get things done, and so they both think they're right, and they are right. But the problem is, two rights actually do make a wrong. That saying, two wrongs don't make a right. I hate to say this, but two rights actually make a wrong. If you think about most, relationship issues, the issue isn't what's right or wrong. Okay, I've seen a lot of marriages, and I listen to both sides, and I just say, both of you guys are right, but the way you're implementing are clashing. Okay, they're really, really clashing. If you look at the pro-life and pro-choice issue on abortion, okay. And I try to be objective. People who are pro-choice really do care about women, okay? And same thing with the choice. So both of them care about the woman, but it's how it's implemented that they differ, okay? It's the same thing with relationships. Both are right, but the way that they are doing it are clashing, okay? So this is why this drive needs to be, in essence, balanced. Because if it's not balanced and both of them are myopic and they're trying to do it, they're always going to fight that they're the right. And they are. Both of them are right. The problem is how they're accomplishing it is how they're clashing it. Okay? The one will be angry and emotional, and the other one will try to be controlling and systematic. Okay? So that's why it destroys relationships. That's why it clashes a lot. And I see it in work. I see it in marriage life, and it's not good. Okay? The other reason why it's not good is it doesn't build virtue. Okay? When you're just comfortable and doing what your passion tells you to do, then you're not building virtue. Okay? You're not using reason. Okay? Critical things to understand is that myopic drive makes us good and not great. That's one thing. Just like my story about my business, if I just had that type A personality, I would have never, scaled my business. Okay. Conversely, a person who's a turtle, okay, probably couldn't even survive in the fluid environment and be a success. That's one of the big thing that I've noticed is that a lot of times the turtles have a problem starting in the real life because real life sometimes a lot of times doesn't have a system. Where they typically thrive is in areas that they do have systems, but then they feel comfortable in that and they won't grow out of that. Okay. So, you're kind of in this good category, but never the great and taking it to the next steps. Okay. So what's the paradigm shift? How do we solve this? Okay. We need to be balanced in the way we drive and focus our attention on those things we are weak at to be really successful. And I have this saying, and I say, our strengths become our weakness when our weakness cannot control our strengths. Let me say that again. Our strengths become our weakness when our weakness cannot control our strengths. A lot of times, we think that our strengths, and we rely on our strengths. This is the main problem. And we never focus on our weaknesses. It's almost like, and that's what the definition of pride really is, okay? We don't want to burst our bubble to say, hey, I have some weaknesses, all right? And so we don't become well-rounded, and that's what happens. So we need to focus on our weaknesses to become well-rounded. In essence, we need to seek perfection, okay? Perfection here doesn't mean no mistakes. Perfection means to complete ourselves. We're in essence incomplete. We're incomplete because we lack virtues. We're incomplete because of grace, and we're incomplete because we lack God. All right. So if we can control our weaknesses, if we can improve on our weaknesses, then we will really become strong. We will really become great. And that's what we need to do. So how do we obtain balance? Well, first, by virtue. All right. And what do I always say about virtue? Virtue is a doing. Virtue is a doing. This is not a reading. You can read about the virtues, but you will never acquire the virtues unless you do. All right? We cannot acquire virtue unless we do, unless we get experience, and this includes failing. All right? So fortitude. So first thing we need to have is humility. To know what our weaknesses are. A lot of people, get confused on what humility is. Humility is simply just assessing your true self. I got strengths, I got weaknesses. Okay? A lot of time, pride says, I only have my strength, and everyone else is the weaknesses. They blame weaknesses on everyone else. But no, you have weaknesses. Assess them. All right? And then, so when we assess those weaknesses, then we focus on our weaknesses. And we tone down our strength. That's another thing, is we tone down our strength and we increase we improve on our strengths. So, but again, it takes experience. It takes a doing when we practice these virtues. And it's going to fail. The only way, that you increase in patience is by being in an environment where you need to be patient. All right? And exercise that virtue of patience. And you might fail. You might yell and scream. But get back on the horse, go to confession, get back in there and work it harder, okay? So that's what's going to happen. So first we need is the virtue of humility, okay? Know always to seek perfection, meaning completeness, wholeness, right? The next is fortitude, okay? Openly try new things, experiences. This is how you're going to build those virtues, all right? Don't be afraid, all right? So in my business, I wanted to scale. That means I had to go in an area that I'm not comfortable with, which is systems, processes, okay? Those types of things. Be patient, all right? That's really important, patience, because you will fail, okay? There will be things that will occur. Sincerity and genuineness, all right? Be sincere and genuine in who you are. Sometimes, I really, it's hard because a lot of these books that are for businesses are good, and it's hard for me because sometimes I want people to read them because they have great gems of wisdom, but sometimes it gives me heartache because I see people who read them become manipulative. Okay, and I see it at meetings, at businesses. I see it everywhere, rather than being really genuine. Okay, and you can see it a mile away. The disingenuineness of it, and sincerity. The most importantly is sincerity. They don't know how to be sincere. So it's a love-hate relationships in those books. But if you can read it, glean the good parts out of it, and understand there's a pitfalls on the other aspects. And I always emphasize that. I go to a lot of meetings, and at least here internally where I manage the people, and I say, good books, but you need to understand to be sincere and genuine, okay, and not manipulative in these things. Examination of conscience. You're going to fail in this area. You're going to have, to do that. And I combine examination of conscience with self-reflection. This is something that's very, very important. Both myopic is to be self-reflective. All right. The reason why you need to be self-reflective is that that's the only way you're really going to be able to change who you are. Self-realization is the catalyst of change. And reflecting on who you are and where you are at is important. And part of that self-reflection begins with an examination of conscience. All right? That's what did I do good? What did I do bad? How can I improve? You know, if you think about examination of conscience, that's exactly what that is. You know, St. Ignatius of Loyola, you know, didn't want to always emphasize your sins. He said a lot of times, you know, he wanted you to focus on your sins, but the category that he wanted you to do is, first of all, is focus on what you've done bad, but just a little bit, you know, like I lied or I, you know, said bad things, right? Focus on that. Then the second thing you should focus on, though, is what have you failed to do? Okay, did I not say, you know, things that are uplifting? Did I not, you know, commit to do my commitments? So it's bad things. Then it's things that you didn't do, and then third is how do I improve it? What is that virtue do I need to improve? This is what you need to do. This is why examination of conscience, combined with self-reflecting, reflecting on the day, will help you improve. Okay? That's so important. Okay? The other is observe the opposite behaviors. If you're a rabbit, observe a turtle. If you're a turtle, observe a rabbit. I've surrounded myself with a lot of turtles because they are very good at what they do. But I've observed them and I tried to mimic them. You know, that's what happens. If you want to be, you know, acquire something, then observe it in other people. How do they do it? Discuss it with them. And I do that frequently. I love talking to other turtles so that I can become like they are. Detachment. You got to detach on your ideas, the way you're thinking. It kind of goes in with humility in a sense of that you have to detach thinking that you are right, that you are that, you know, your ideas are always the correct one. All right. And detach from those things. More specifically, if you're a rabbit, patience is important. A regimented life is important. Okay. Process. Think about how can I make, you know, my life into more of a process. And then the virtues, more specifically, is persistence and longanimity. Now, I discussed that in I think it was in episode 4 in that. So virtue of persistence and longanimity. If you're a turtle, fortitude. That's all I can say is fortitude. All right, because you're going to feel like you're a fish out of water when you're in a fluid environment and when you're in in an ambiguous world. All right, self-reflection and meditation. This is probably one of the biggest things. You know, rabbits naturally do self-reflect and meditate. All right, they really are. So they naturally do that, but turtles don't. You know, turtles, because they live in a world of systems, they act more like a robot, okay, than they do live life conscientiously, okay? It's because they just love a system and they follow a system. That's what they basically do. And they don't reflect and meditate as much, okay? So I would say for turtles, you need to really emphasize self-reflection and meditation, okay? You know, and how that impacts other people. Okay, an examination of conscience talks about how what's neat about it is it's not just looking at it from your perspective. It's also looking at it from a perspective of others. Okay, all right. So the worldly sense of self-reflection is how can I improve myself? How can I be a good person? Well, self-examination, it goes down and breaks it down into those 3 parts. Is how did I hurt other people? How did I impact other people? That's the consequences of our sin. And that's why an examination of conscience, coupled with self-reflection, is very, very important, okay? Put your position, another thing that you can do as a turtle is put yourself in areas where you need to problem solve, okay? And then taking responsibility. Turtles have a tough time, taking responsibility, okay? They either blame it on the system or they blame it on others, okay? Or they blame the lack of control, all right, which is really the lack of a process or system. So they got to take responsibility, okay? So bottom line, we're called to a life of perfection. Remember, that's what we are. We are called to a life of perfection. Jesus says, be perfect as my heavenly Father is perfect. Perfect here does not mean no mistake, but means we need to complete ourselves. We need to make ourselves whole. There's something we lack. What do we lack? We lack virtue, we lack grace, we lack God. When we have myopic drive, we can seriously damage relationships, but even worse, feel like we are in the right and doing great work, when in reality we are hurting other people and limiting ourselves because we drive in a myopic way. That's basically what happens. We will really destroy our relationships. We will limit ourselves at work and our family life. Balance is key, and the only way to achieve balance is to be humble and strive for perfection, which seeks detachment in our old ways. This is how we will grow at work, family life, and spirituality. This comes from James. Count it all joy, my brethren, when you meet various trials. For you know, and when James says here trials, you got to look at trials doesn't mean martyrdom. Trials don't mean that you're defending your faith. Trials means all the trials you go through, whether they're small or big, okay? And he's saying this, when you meet various trials, okay, at work, at home, at family, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. Listen to this, okay? So these trials are going to produce steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So if you were to take that paragraph, what St. James is saying is all these various trials that you're going through are testing you, all right? Remember, virtue can't be created, okay, until you experience it. These experiences create these trials that test you, okay, test your faith and produces steadfastness. And what does steadfastness do? Steadfastness has its full effect that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Okay? And then St. James gives an example. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives to all men generously and without reproaching, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways, will receive anything from the Lord. So in essence, what he's saying here is ask. First, ask God, okay, for what you are lacking. That's what you got to do. And so to be balanced, be humble enough to ask him. And if and he will. And the way that God answers our prayers, and I hate to say this, is through trials. All right? Through trials, he will answer your prayer. So God will answer our prayers through trials and getting outside of our comfort zone. So let us end it with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord, help us to get out of our comfort zone. Help us to love others by striving for perfection and holiness. Let us always be humble. As we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thanks for listening to me, David Cease, at Practical Catholic. Here's a reflection for you. Take a moment and reflect, when was the last time you seemed like a failure? Did you learn from it? How did you overcome the failure? Feel free to share your reflection or leave a comment on the podcast, Instagram, and Facebook at Practical Catholic, or visit my webpage at practicalcatholic1, that is the number 1.com. Join me next week as we discuss free will and taking ownership and responsibility of our lives in work, life, and spirituality.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom